All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome back, everyone, to spring semester and to our spring semester Friends of HSF Alumni Speaker Series. We were very happy with such a successful fall series with engaging our alumni with our students that we're really excited to start the spring. And we have a great guest today in Claire Georgiadis, and she's going to be discussing how to network in a virtual environment. So before I tell you more about Claire, let me introduce our student moderator for today. Our student moderator is Ava Bartolome, and Ava is a freshman from Orlando, Florida, majoring in political science, and she's also a member of the HSF Student Advisory Board. Ava's interests include history, journalism, and travel. So thank you for being here, Ava. I'd now like to introduce our guest for this afternoon. Claire is currently a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Communications Associate at Pratt & Whitney, which is part of Raytheon Technologies, and a leadership group that she's in. And this leadership program is a 2-year rotational program where early career professionals in communications rotate through various business units across Raytheon Technologies every 8 months. Claire's first rotation was at Otis Elevator, where she supported social media and internal communications. She then transitioned to a rotation at Pratt & Whitney, where she worked in internal communications, primarily surrounding COVID-19. As of November 2020, she is in her third and final rotation, where she supports diversity, equity, and inclusion communications for Pratt & Whitney. Claire is also currently pursuing a Master of Science in Communication from Purdue University while working full-time. Claire graduated from FSU in May of 2019 with a Bachelor of Science in Media Communications and a minor in English. During her time at FSU, she was an honors colloquium leader, a research assistant in the Cognition and Emotion Lab, a teaching assistant in the College of Communication and Information, and she was involved with Florida State Panhellenic as well as her campus. She was busy. So thank you for being here, Claire, and I'm now going to hand it over to Ava.
Thank you, Amy, and welcome, Claire. So before we get started, participants feel free to ask any questions in the chat, and our hosts will do the best to get to them. I'd like to start, Claire, by asking you about your journey through FSU and your current profession.
Thanks, Amy and Ava. I appreciate the introduction. It's great to be here. So for background, I'm from a small town outside of in Mars, Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh, and I chose to attend Florida State my freshman year as a dance major. I had intentions of double majoring. So I went in to Florida State freshman year as a dance major. I'd done ballet for the first 18 years of my life, and so it really seemed like a seamless transition for me at the time. And I went through my freshman year as a dance major. I lived in Landis, took most of my classes in Montgomery Dance Hall, took a few in the Honors and Scholars Building, and I loved it. I came to realize, though, at the end of my freshman year, it was going to take 6 years to pursue 2 degrees. And while I'd always loved ballet, I really valued my academic career as well. And I wanted a professional career in corporate, preferably corporate communications after graduation. So after my freshman year, I made the decision to drop the dance major, which was a tough decision for me, but I was able to find the passion that I had cultivated from my time in ballet transition into a passion for communications. And so I really used that passion to drive me across campus and get involved. Throughout my time in my undergrad, I was the Her Campus PR chair. I was a research assistant in the Cognition and Emotion Lab, like Amy said. I was the vice president of communications for Florida State Panhellenic. I had several other leadership and academic involvement positions and internships as well. All said, I was busy, like Amy said, but keeping my passion at the center of what I did was important because at times it felt really challenging to balance classes with research and extracurriculars, and at times the internship and job search. So it gave me a sense of grounding and purpose, and I still get to do what I love in my current role. I work for Raytheon Technologies. I'm a part of a global communications leadership development program, which is a 2-year rotation program for early career professionals, kind of right outside of college. And I get to experience different parts of communications every 8 months. I'm in my third and final rotation now at Pratt & Whitney, and it's been a phenomenal journey along the way. And I'm really thankful that I had all the opportunities I did at Florida State and the journey that I took to get there, because it really helped bring me to where I am today. And I know it will continue to keep me going through the many years to come.
That's awesome. And it's really interesting that you sort of had a struggle between professional versus artistic career. I know a lot of students that go through that decision, and it's tough. So we have questions that your participants submitted. We can start with how did you get your job and the job search? Does your major have anything to do with your job?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think to kind of go back to what you said earlier, it's a lot of it is kind of not knowing and figuring it out as you go. I think that's a big part of your college experience. But for me, I would say my job was a culmination of several different things. First, yes, my major played a significant role in me securing a job post graduation because of my undergrad coursework in communications, my extracurriculars, my internship experiences, and my passion for communications. But having a clear exact plan is not something I think I really had going into my fall senior year in 2018. This was actually because part of me wanted to go into a full-time job and the other part wanted to go directly into a graduate program. And so in answering the how question of how did I get my job, what I did was develop a post-grad spreadsheet. And part of that spreadsheet was grad school focused. So I had various master's programs that I was interested in when I had applied, if there was additional material that was needed. And then I also had a part of that spreadsheet that included all of the jobs that I was looking at. Raytheon Technologies, which at the time was formerly United Technologies, we had a big merger this past year, was interesting to me from the start, given my internship experiences and the intrigue that came from the rotational program experience, getting that a lot of different involvement and exposure to communications really early on. But that was not the only job I looked at. I used Indeed to do most of my job search, and every time I would find a new job, I would put it into my tracker and I would just keep track of all the jobs I had applied to, if there was follow-up that was needed, if I had a point of contact there. And the tracker really helped keep me organized in terms of just making sure I was meeting deadlines, providing the right materials, staying organized and on track. And I will say that, in November, I secured a job with Raytheon, and now I'm currently working my master's. But from this experience, there were a few important things that I learned. And the first is to be open. Like I said, it's okay if you don't know exactly what you want to do, but I think it's important to not put all of your eggs in one basket. And then the second is the fact that when I was working through my spreadsheet, I was taking time almost every week, if not more than once a week, to go through the spreadsheet, apply to jobs, network, follow up, send follow up emails, and prepare for interviews. And it was a process. It took a lot of time. And at times, it was hard to prioritize that with the job, with academics, with extracurriculars, and the occasional Florida State football game. But it's important that you take the time to do that because it will really help you long term. And then I think the third realization for me throughout this whole process in the job search was understanding that you are going to get no's, and that's okay. You have to keep going. That's, again, part of the process. And for me, it helped me grow significantly when I got those no's because it helped me become more resilient long term. And so, overall, I don't know if everyone has to do exactly what I did from my job search process, but I think it's important, really important to keep yourself organized, prepare for those no's, be persistent, and be consistent with what you're doing.
It sounds like in your experience and even your job search that you're really connected and in tune with how to network virtually. Clearly, that's the topic of this Q&A. But what have you found that assists you with making successful virtual connections and maintaining those connections?
That's a good question. I think first, to caveat, is that I am by no means a networking expert. I'm an early career professional, and I think understanding that networking is a skill that needs continual tending, work, and improvement is an important realization when you're just starting out or when you're, in your career. But I think something that really helps with the success of maintaining those connections is being intentional with those relationships. So when you are meeting with someone, have a purpose for that meeting. Maybe you need career advice. Maybe you have a question and they're a subject matter expert. Maybe you hit a career milestone and you want to share with them. I think it's important to always have purpose for those meetings. And with that, be respectful of the time of the people that you're connecting with. Ask for appropriate time. Don't ask for 4 hours. Be realistic. And sometimes you might only need 15 minutes, and that might be really insightful to get you that answer or that fact or that insight that you need to keep going. And then I think a really important one with maintaining connections, especially now, is not being afraid to reach out. even in this environment, I found that the people that I've connected with have been really open to conversations. And it might seem intimidating at first because we're all, Zoom fatigued, but for a lot of people that I've connected with, it's a breath of fresh air and it's a different conversation that they look forward to having. So don't be afraid to just do it and then keep doing it. I think part of being successful or having continual success in those virtual connections is just continuing to do it. Like I said, with the aspect of job searching, it's not just a one-off. It's needs continual work, and you need to, make time for it if you really want to keep pushing forward and keep doing it.
Awesome. So it's a really substantive process. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions amongst kids in my dorm is that networking is a one and done. Um, do you have a virtual mentor or a mentee relationship? And do you think that's a good opportunity, especially right now?
Yes, I think I have both, and I think it's very important. This year specifically, for me personally, I saw so much value in having mentors. It was a really different year in 2020, and so having multiple mentors across different areas for me in different industries too was important. I think for me, I was lucky enough that throughout my rotational experience, I've been able to develop relationships both personally and professionally with people that I've worked with that I admire. And like I said, they've helped exponentially this past year with career advice, guidance, and a lot of times just a listening ear. So I think a virtual mentorship is a phenomenal opportunity right now because there's so much that is happening, and it's important to have people that you can rely on for advice and insight and career guidance, and they can turn just from one conversation to a long-term connection and a long-term conversation.
Do you network through social media? And I feel a need to distinguish between the LinkedIn social aspect of networking versus Twitter, Instagram, Facebook.
Yeah, that's a good question and a good distinguisher too. I think I've done networking when it comes to social media. My networking has been done through LinkedIn. If I was using a social media channel, it was LinkedIn. And I found it was best when I was using LinkedIn to see if I could have a frame of reference, someone to introduce me to someone else, or a point of contact to kind of help me get to that next person. Especially if you're starting out, it might make you feel more comfortable having that introduction. And then another tip I actually learned in my undergrad was to use if you go to the Florida State LinkedIn page, there's an alum feature, and you can search to see if there are certain alum that are working in your business, in your industry, or if there's an industry that you're interested in. And that's also a good kind of point of contact or frame of reference for starting that conversation or starting that connection.
So when you were making connections in college, did you have an internship and did that assist in any way with networking?
Yeah, I had two internships in college. One was after my sophomore year, and it was with a health insurance broker. And then one was after my junior year, and that was at Southwest Airlines. And I think both of those internships were significant for many reasons. First, they helped me land my job. And then second, with the connections and the networking aspect, I think it's really important because for Southwest in specific, I had a lot of colleagues that I worked with that I now stay connected with that are work in similar industries as I do. So it's nice to have that network and community. And then second, and I think more importantly, or just equally as important, is that it gives me something to talk about, and it gave me something to talk about when I went to interviews, when I went to networking calls or networking events. It was, again, a frame of reference, and it gave me experiences that I could share and relate and provide insight on to the people that were listening to what I had to say. And even now, I find that my internship experiences, sometimes I'll bring them up in my current role or in past roles if I find that it's relevant. So overall, I think internships are a really important part of helping with connections because it helps you begin to shape your story and shape your narrative for what your career will look like. And it's also a central part, I think, of getting a job post graduation is having internships. So I think overall it was really, really helpful for me for both of those reasons. And I think it helped with making connections as well.
Could you speak a little more about the process of landing an internship or applying to an internship?
Yeah, I actually think reflecting back on it, my process for applying to internships was pretty similar to my process for applying for jobs post graduation. I know I talk a lot about this spreadsheet, but it was really helpful for me because I was looking for so many internships, and the same thing goes for jobs. I think I applied to, I can't even remember how many, but a lot. And I didn't hear back from a lot of them. And that's normal. You might apply to 30 jobs and only hear back from 2, or same thing with internships. So the spreadsheet was really helpful for me, not just in terms of staying organized, but just seeing everywhere that I applied and keeping track of all of the things that I needed to do moving forward. So looking for internships in college, I think it was helpful to have a spreadsheet, but also to just do my research. What was I interested in? And be open. I didn't really anticipate that my internship experience would be what it was, but it was exactly what brought me to where I am today. So I'm so thankful for those experiences. And I think it's really important to be open. I was fortunate enough that I could, look across industry, across locations. I wasn't tied to a specific place, but I think it's important to just keep researching, keep looking, and always keep applying, especially, when you are looking for internships before your junior year, before your senior year, just being consistent and keep going, even when you get those no's.
How do you balance networking in your master's program at Purdue and your job now?
Ooh, well, I am far from perfect at it. But I think, again, it's really about finding ways to prioritize and be intentional with your time. There are some days when work is my number one priority, and there are some days when I have a little bit more time to focus on grad school and weekends as well. But I always have to make sure I'm designating time for networking, to connect with my mentors, to grow my connections, to make new connections in the virtual environment. We don't, I'm not in person in office, so there's limited amounts of networking events, but we've been able to find ways to do it differently, which has been really amazing. And I'm very lucky that we've had those opportunities. But just making sure that I'm finding opportunities on my own too, to grow my network, to talk to my mentors, to take that time to really continue to focus on career development beyond just what I'm currently doing, whether it's master's or my job. So I don't know if it's necessarily balancing it in terms of it's more just prioritizing it. But I do stick to a pretty strict schedule when it comes to my work day, because I need to take time for work and for grad school and for other things that I do, and then also for networking. So it's just finding ways to fit it all in.
Are you working or going to class in person right now, or are you completely virtual?
Yeah, so I'm completely virtual for both. My master's degree was even before COVID had started, it was always an online program because it's for working professionals. But so when I started my second rotation at Pratt& Whitney, I was in person in the office for 2 weeks. So I had met a handful of people in the office, and then I went remote. So it was a big change for me back in March. And I've definitely been able to adapt to a virtual environment for working. But I think it's really important to find that harmony of taking your time for yourself as well as working and grad school and all of it. But yeah, I am virtual for both right now. So it's definitely was a different experience for me, but so far it's been good.
That's great. I mean, when it comes to the virtual hybrid environment, I think a lot of people face obstacles making that transition, but it's great that you kind of adapted to that and clearly are successful. But what was, I guess, the biggest obstacle in networking in your job virtually? And have you overcome that obstacle? How so?
Yeah. I think for me at first it was intimidating because I know, and we all know, that we're all Zoom fatigued. And I was worried that if I reached out, it was just going to be another meeting. And I was worried that I would get no's. And to go back to my earlier point, sometimes it happens and that's okay. But it was still an intimidating process. And networking at its core can feel uncomfortable a lot. Even if you do it a lot, you can still feel uncomfortable with the whole process. But what I found was, throughout my experience of trying to make connections virtually and just having networking calls and talking to different people, is that people are so open and likely to meet and talk about their experience. They actually, in my experience, they found that it's a nice change of pace or conversation. And even after those calls, I always find myself taking a step back and being like, I have no idea why I was scared. But it definitely is intimidating at first. I think something you can also do to make yourself feel more comfortable is do your research. If you're talking to a new person, do your research on them. Maybe come with a list of questions that you might have. Be prepared for the conversation. Be prepared to talk about yourself. So I think in terms of getting over the intimidation part, it's kind of a twofold of just going and doing it and getting more comfortable with it, but also preparing yourself well enough to feel confident and comfortable in that conversation.
So in making these virtual connections nowadays, do you see these sustaining and remaining when everyone is back in person, or will that require some sort of external work towards these relationships?
Yeah, I think a majority of my connections will be 100% virtual, even if I do, when we go back to office. A lot of my connections that I've made, like I said, have been from my rotational experience. And so they're colleagues and mentors or people that I have that are outside of my current role or my current job. And so it's across industry and it's just different people that are staying in my network. And so for many reasons, I won't see them when I go back to office, but I don't think that will limit any of my ability to stay connected with them because Zoom and just a phone call or a quick text have been really helpful in keeping those connections consistent. And then even when we are back in person, I know it will stay very much the same because a lot of them are, based where I am as well. So.
That's great. I want to go back real quick to when you touched on internships earlier. How important is that experience on a resume or in general as compared to coursework and GPA?
I think they're all very important for different reasons. You get your coursework to prepare you for an internship, to prepare you for the full-time job. So they're all weighted for different reasons. And your GPA is also part of that. I think for me, my coursework helped me land my internship, and my internship helped me land my job. So they're all weighted. I think the internship is where you gain those tactical skills that you can speak to for your full-time job, and the academic side is where you can speak to your learnings. And then internship also gives you more learning, but I think it's the tactical stuff that you learn too from those internship experiences that really helps kind of land you that full-time role. I know in my experience, it was definitely both. Because there were projects that I worked on in some of my classes that I could speak to in interviews, and there was internship experience that I could also speak to. So it was valuable, inherently valuable to place a strong focus and an emphasis on both.
Have you been able to use any of your internship connections for job opportunities? Did that networking sort of help you land your current job?
I think I used my internship experience to help get my job, but that was separate from kind of the networking side of it. I do think that through the process, talking about my experiences in my internship to help land my job. And I think it will continue to help in my future as well. But I definitely used my internship more for the experience in itself to land my full-time job.
And I know these internships were completely in person. So I guess back to virtual networking, so many people are utilizing lunches and happy hours virtually. Do you find that these are helpful as in person, or do they just exacerbate Zoom fatigue?
I
You are,
do. Oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry.
No, you are totally fine. Go ahead.
No, I think they're really helpful, and I think they're important because whether you're on a camera, behind a screen, or you're in person, getting comfortable talking about yourself to other people is really important to do. And so any way you can do that, I think is inherently valuable. And I think going into this year, we're still going to have a lot of virtual networking lunch sessions and happy hours. And so I think that understanding that it's not just another meeting and that there is going to be value in that meeting is maybe a better way to think about it. Because like I said, it's so important to have those experiences where you're talking about yourself and talking to other people and learning how to ask questions and learn more about them and have those real conversations. I think that is so important and so valuable. And so when you do go back into the office, or when you do have in-person meetings or in-person networking sessions, you're that much more comfortable and confident with those kinds of in-person sessions because you've been able to practice
So with these virtual networking opportunities and just virtual meetings in general, how are you overcoming Zoom fatigue?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's another one that's really just a work in progress. For me personally, I try to turn my camera on for most of my meetings, if not all of them. I know that's probably a tip that a lot of people have heard and seen, but I find it really valuable because I'm someone who values face-to-face contact. And as a communicator myself, I like to get feedback and see feedback from other people. And so I find that it's best if I can see it on their face, but you can also hear it in their voice too. But so I think for me, it's always important to try and have my camera on. And also to avoid Zoom fatigue, I think it's important to give yourself time for breaks. I know a lot of times people will schedule meetings and give the last 5 minutes to, do what you need to do. If it's grab a drink of water or, take a walk or do whatever you need to do to just give yourself that time. There are days when I'm in back-to-back meetings and it can be a little bit, it can be feel like a long day, but I try and find those moments where I can just take a break, take a mental break, take a walk, go outside, because it can get hard, especially with grad school too. I'm on my computer almost all day. So, and I'm sure a lot of students feel the same way. So I think it's important to take the time for yourself, even if it is just a 2 minute, 3 minute, 5 minute break during the day to really avoid getting overworked and over fatigued.
So after your master's program in graduate school, what do you intend to do career-wise? Do you anticipate staying in the same field or branching out to other opportunities?
That's a good question. um, so I will be a forever learner. I jokingly say that, but I loved school. And as funny as that sounds, it's true. I love learning. And so I think following this master's degree, I'll probably go straight into another one. So that's kind of on my radar. But I think in terms of career, I definitely, I love the industry that I'm in. I love aerospace and defense. It moves really fast and it's dynamic and really exciting. So I'd love to stay in that industry and just continue to do the work that I'm doing in communications and see how we can touch people through strategic campaigns and initiatives. It's all very empowering. And so I really love the industry and that I'm in and the work that I do. And I think continuing to grow myself as a learner will help advance, my career. So it's exciting.
As as a technologically savvy person that you might be, do you use Zoom solely for networking, or do you have any other platforms for networking opportunities?
That's a good question. I think Zoom is probably where most of it happens. I do, use LinkedIn too, like I said, and sometimes with people, I'll just give them a phone call. Because sometimes I'll find that networking calls people will take if they're taking a walk in their day. So, or a break in their day, and that's their break time. So, I think in terms of technology, it's really being respectful of if it's a one-on-one conversation, it's being respectful of what the other person would prefer. Sometimes it's good to ask that because again, that might be their 15 minutes in their day that they need just to take a walk. And the conversation is, a good conversation, but it's nice to just use a phone for it instead of Zoom. But I think for those bigger networking events, most of the ones that I've participated in have been via Zoom.
Are you currently a mentor in the FSU professional mentor database? Do you mentor people currently?
Um, I have my account set up through FSU. So yes, most of my mentor relationships I think are just kind of ad hoc right now. But yeah, I'm always open to helping people along the way if anything I ever talk about is helpful. So
This is the last live question we have from the audience. Are you willing to share your contact information for more info?
yeah, totally. My LinkedIn is up to date. So if you want to connect with me, feel free to connect. And I think Amy will connect if there are questions that come after the conversation. I am so happy to be a resource. Florida State gave me so much. So I want to continue being a person that can give back to a university that just gave me basically a lot of what I have today. So
I'm glad somebody asked that because yes, I will share Claire's email with you all. And we did have multiple live questions. So those were great questions at the end. And If you did not get to ask a question and you really want to, feel free to email me after, because I will connect you with Claire and you can talk to her directly. But I think, unless Claire, if you didn't have anything else you wanted to say, I was just going to thank you so much for being here today and for doing our first one of these of the semester. I love what you had to say. I think it's very important. And yes, you were very busy, and yes, you are still very busy, but you seem to be making it all work, which is awesome.
For having
So yeah. Yeah, no, thank you for being here, and thank you, Ava, for moderating. And I just wanted to let you all know, please look out for more of our speaker series throughout the semester. Our next one is going to be February 17th, and it's going to be on crisis management, which I think will be another great topic. And so tomorrow you can expect a follow-up email from me with the recording of this, as well as Claire's email address and other information. So we look forward to continuing to do these for you, and thank you for joining us today, and stay well.
Thanks.